Welcome back to We Are Cooking. Arsenal entered the final 3 game weeks of the season this weekend as a brilliant Bournemouth side visit the Emirates in the early kickoff on Saturday. Despite it mathematically being out of our hands, let's stay focused, because after effectively a winter break in their run-in, that Spurs team do not look like they're going down without a fight. I mean, literally in Richarlison's case. Wolves and West Ham are no slouches, and we know firsthand how tough Fulham are at Craven Cottage. And after looking at the problems Nottingham Forest caused that Man City defence on Sunday afternoon, Christopher Wood, you have blood on your hands, mate. I wouldn't be so sure that this title race is anything like a foregone conclusion. Remain in it, and let's see. And we are in it because, lads and ladies, we are so good at football. Like, we are very good at kicking the ball around. I think most analysis of football, by which I mean the physical game itself, not the deals around it and so on, and definitely mine included, probably barely scratches the surface of explaining what goes on training pitches at Premier League clubs every day that causes them to come out on a Saturday as they do. In other words, the actual coaching. The ideas behind the football. What managers really think about when they're on the touchline. The real reasons for certain decisions in a game. Why this player made that movement and not the one I wanted him to. Of course, there is an element of it that's randomness and individual brilliance, but the more I learn about the game itself, the more I realise I don't know much. And a lot of what I used to think was random, especially at the top level, is often prepared and worked on in the week. So, when we're given concrete inside access into any club's game model, let alone Arsenal's game model, we have to give it a look and see what we can take from it if we want to make more sense of what we see. Declan Rice spoke to The Athletic's Stuart James this week in what is a fantastic article. He talks all about Arteta's demands of him, how his instructions differ from what he was doing at West Ham, gives great insight into the methodology at the club, and so on. It is a brilliant read, and I learned a great deal. The Athletic are not paying me to say the following, to be clear. However, I would encourage everyone to sign up and read the full thing if this is the sort of thing you're interested in, because I'll only be able to cover a small part of it, so I'll leave the link in the description. But The Athletic, if you're watching, if you wanted to give me a code for my audience, I'm not saying no. Let's dive in and see what we can learn. The first thing I want to focus on is what Rice refers to as good height, which is something Mikel stresses a lot, Declan says. The aim is pretty simple. Arteta wants to use his number 6 to help Arsenal to sustain final third dominance in possession, something we can see working in our field tilt numbers and unlock doors around the opposition box. Rice explains that rather than retaining a more rigid 6 position that he refers to from his West Ham days, for example, the 6 for Arteta is asked to step forward more into these pockets when the ball goes wide. Let's have a look at it in action to better understand this. As the 8, in this case Odegaard, is often attracted out to the right-hand side or onto the last line to support our wide player and create overloads, a space is often vacated centrally. They used an example at Crystal Palace in the article, but we can also see it here against Aston Villa in that first half a number of times. Saka and Odegaard are in a 2v3 situation and unable to progress. You can see Rice high in the pocket, ready to receive. If he wasn't there and was further back in that more rigid 6 position, the only option would probably be to go back to Ben White. As it is, Saka finds Rice in that pocket and Arsenal keep the momentum up in the final third, sustaining the attack. An example of good height. Again, Saka and White this time in a 3v2. If Rice isn't supporting, Saka would have to go backwards, or certainly pass backwards to Odegaard if he can't get the pass off to Ben White. Rice makes the underlapping run from a high starting position, Saka finds him, and Rice pokes it through to Jesus, who gets a half chance. Similarly, on the left-hand side, we can see this concept playing out too, this time with Partey playing at 6 against Spurs. So it's not just a Rice thing. Balls on the left, winger high and wide, fullback up, left 8 on the last line, so there's the space that the player playing 6 has to fill. If Partey isn't here, again in that more rigid 6 position, you might have to recycle possession back from Tomiyasu, and you wouldn't occupy these defenders as well as you could without players on the last line. It's a slightly risky move, as obviously you remove a degree of protection in possession, but an advantage of it is you're ready to jump with one of your best ball winners high and early if Arsenal do turn the ball over. And obviously in possession, it gives you the advantage of an extra man, often in space when he receives, to do something with the ball. Indeed, stepping into that pocket as the 6 gave Rice the impetus to score that goal against Chelsea away at Stamford Bridge. It's not world-changing, earth-shattering tactics, but it is interesting to note what Arteta asks his 6 to do in these phases when compared to, say, a David Moyes at West Ham. And Rice confirms it is something he began to implement during the summer and hadn't done before. Interestingly, when Jorginho plays 6, I don't think we see him do this as much. So I wonder what the adjustment is when he's playing, though I maybe and probably am wrong. Interestingly, Rice references the pre-season game against United when talking about his adaptation to this new role. I mentioned that game in a video about Rice a few months ago in this light, so it was nice for my ego to hear Declan refer to it too, and you could see very clearly that that was a game where Rice's positioning was stifling us progressively, partly as he was learning this new good height demand. And from that higher position, Declan also refers to something else. We're really big on playing same side and work on it, according to him. Essentially, same side is the idea, as I understand it, that once the ball comes out from a wing, of course you expect the switch or the pass across the face of the box. But actually, sometimes it's best to go back where you came from, as that's not where the pass is expected, and the defenders can be caught out. Using this principle wisely can have great results. They give the example of Rice against Everton, but to me there's no better example of this than this goal against Luton, which was the one that immediately came to mind. Declan fires it into White down the right-hand side, who can't progress. The ball comes back to Saka, and you can see the Luton players disconnect from one another as they expect the ball to go other side. That centre-back just disappears, and the left-back jumps. That's all the space Saka needs to go back down that same side. White sticks the ball up, Jesus header, 2-1 Arsenal. An effective, simple idea, and now we know it has a name and thinking behind it. The next thing, and possibly the most interesting thing, was about switches. In our video about Martinelli recently, we discussed how Arsenal are one of the lowest ranked teams in the Premier League for switches, or passes that travel 40 yards or more widthways across the pitch. I said our lack of those types of balls is probably part of the reason Martinelli is slightly underperforming this season, but I couldn't quite work out and didn't offer why I thought it was happening. And now I partly understand why, and realise why Mikel is the coach and I'm sat here in my bedroom. Rice says the manager, quote, doesn't like diagonals really. So why is that? To look at this, let's go back to December 2021 to one of my most niche football memories of all time. Arsenal were playing West Ham at home, and in the 63rd minute, Rice, playing for the Hammers at the time, produces an exquisite trademark long switch out to the right-hand side to Soufal. It's so random and I'm such a loser, but I remember this pass so vividly. I remember being on holiday at the time, definitely not watching on a dodgy VPN, no chance, and just thinking, we don't have that. And those were the sorts of passes I was hoping he'd bring to Arsenal. And he has at times. However, because Arsenal are deep in this scenario, probably deeper than we would be now, when Soufal receives the ball, he's isolated and marked out of the game. West Ham loft a hopeful ball into the box, and the ball's back with Rice within about 15 seconds in less secure possession. When playing for West Ham under Moyes, Rice explains that you're often playing on the counter against higher lines, so those long switches can often be advantageous, as they tend to actually get players isolated 1v1 with space in behind to attack. Though not here, a lot of the time it works for West Ham with Rice in the team. And if you're playing that way, you can also support the player on the ball. Rice talks about the connection between Soufal and Bowen, that because they knew Declan would try and find them, and the long switch was part of their arsenal, so to speak, they would break quickly, get up the pitch, and support one another to reduce the isolation. But that's not the case here. It's a beautiful pass, and technically really nice. But what do West Ham actually gain? Arguably, they lose a precious 15 seconds in possession. It's probably the wrong pass from Rice, considering where Arsenal were, and as lovely a pass as it is, so nice that I'm referencing it 2.5 years later. So I think this is why we don't see it more often, because the environment isn't really there for Arsenal to gain advantage from that sort of pass very often. Flip the shirt colours, and you can see it. Arsenal against a deep block, Rice plays the ball out to Saka, White's not prepped for it like Soufal and Bowen do, there's no space to attack, no support, the opponent gets men over, and we go back. In fact, you see it inside the first few minutes at Brighton, which is the example they use in the article. If it doesn't actually suit how we play, it's not going to be effective. The Athletic produced this, which is a graph mapping all of Declan's passes that could be defined as a switch from 2018 until now. You can see it became more and more of a weapon as his time went on at West Ham, but at Arsenal, it isn't really a thing. And I hope that explains why. Something else that really struck me while reading was Rice's incredible memory. He's referencing specific tackles he made in 2018 to refer to a technique at one point, which is insane. He paints the exact picture of what happened in this moment against Liverpool at Anfield in incredible minute detail. This is clearly a guy who spends a lot of time analysing his own game and speaks brilliantly on loads of other things in the article. For me though, my main takeaway isn't really Rice. It's egg fried rice. That is so stupid. My main takeaway is this. I can only really speak for myself, but learning about these sorts of things makes me realise how little I know about the actual coaching of the game. Again, I can analyse deals and personalities and so on. and I hope I do know some stuff, but I couldn't explain to you why Arteta chose a 5v2 possession game over a 4v2 possession game in training, for example. And I'm not being harsh on myself. I don't think many people can. It was summed up in this moment. There was an interview Arteta did before the Chelsea game at the Emirates, where Martin Keown asked him about his game plan to nullify Chelsea. Arteta's answer was this: where you lose the ball is a key thing, and in the area that you lose it, what kind of structure do you have? And how aware you are, not only in the first action, but also in the second action. You start to lose runners from second lines, from fullbacks, you're in big trouble because they're really good at attacking open spaces. Loads of interesting concepts there, stuff I'd love to learn more about. What structure, for example, does Arteta think you should have when you lose the ball? And how do you coach that? He finished his answer, and Rio Ferdinand took the conversation off down some alleyway about bottling. Look, Rio Ferdinand is making a TV show. It's not on him. And I'm not trying to say everyone should be able to speak with this level of technical understanding on the game. Far from it. You shouldn't have to have your UEFA Pro license to talk about football. The game is for everyone. It's also literally Arteta's job to know this stuff. However, to me, when we take that jump into trying to analyse teams, for whatever reason, in a more broadcast or commercial context, we have to understand that on this aspect of the game, the football itself, most of us, definitely me, are locked out of that top level conversation about it. The conversations had by coaches, in coaching manuals, on coaching courses, gained through getting your badges, your licenses, and years of experience. So these glimpses of detail have to inform our analysis when we get them, because they matter so much when explaining the actual details of the game. Sometimes they can even explain the entire story of a match, depending on your perspective. But usually the access point to them is in very expensive courses. Mikel is often pressed for these details on things and literally refuses to tell people or elaborate more specifically, presumably for fear of things being worked out. When I come to analysing, I always want to keep that in mind. Not to over-mystify things and not to say that I don't think Arteta can get things wrong, but to say that there's things that I definitely, are literally just not privy to. There are always deeper levels. For me, remembering that keeps the, frankly, guesswork we do most of the time fresh, considered, and in perspective. You don't need me to convince you this is a good coach. Look at this. These are the conversations Mikel is entering. He's leaving the Ten Hag, Pochettino ones behind, I'm telling you. Of course, until he wins some silverware, there will always be doubts, but we see the levels, the numbers of this team, and we can see this is an elite coach. So I hope you'll join me as Mikel and those like him teach maybe us, sounds like Declan Rice, but definitely me, the game. If you like The Different Knock, you can support us on Patreon monthly, or you can buy us a coffee.